Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome officially to the channel. This is, as you may or may not know, a series where I go into odd game accessories or peripherals that developers made to get us more into the game mentally or physically. Today, I want to talk about another one of those accessories that were sold for the Game Boy in order to, well, make it easier to play. You see, one of the issues with the Game Boy is the fact that it used a dot matrix screen, and that meant you needed very specific kinds of lighting in order to be able to get the best possible picture out of it. Honestly, to that end, there were no end of solutions to this particular problem, from the Light Boy all the way to the HandyBoy, which is what we're going to talk about today. So if you have a moment, sit back and hang out a while as we go into the shortcomings of the Game Boy and how the HandyBoy was one of the attempts to fix it. The Game Boy was released in 1989 as one of the first really successful handhelds to have interchangeable carts. The actual first one being Milton Bradley's Microvision, which, if you're interested, I actually have a video on this channel covering just that. However, we're not really here to talk about the history of handhelds as much as I need to do something on that. We're here to talk about the Game Boy and one of its many accessories, specifically the HandyBoy, which, as you may have guessed, was an accessory to make the Game Boy not only sound better, but more easily viewable as well. You see, the Game Boy, for as amazing as it was pretty limited by today's standards, only having a dot matrix screen, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, dot matrix screen is more of a greenish gray screen that would use colored dots to represent the characters on the screen. It's pretty much a black and white screen, for lack of a better description. It sounds primitive, but what Nintendo was able to do with it, and the limited sound on the unit, was nothing short of amazing, and a huge eye-opener for the industry as a whole. It ushered in handheld gaming as a mainstay by supplying affordable gaming at roughly $20 a cart and 40 hours off of the battery life of 4 AA batteries. However, in order to give this kind of battery life, they had to make certain things, well, certain sacrifices, like, a backlit screen, which doesn't sound too terrible till you try to play this thing in the dark or in direct sunlight. Basically, you kinda needed perfect lighting. That's where this and other devices came in. This device, unlike the Game Boy Light, which only magnified the screen and lit it up, the HandyBoy tried to do more than that. However, what all did this thing do, and how did it hook up to your console? Well, let's take a look. This unit technically plugged into the headphone jack at the bottom of the Game Boy to give you the stereo sound the unit promised, as the main unit only had a single speaker, which was still pretty common in this time, even with TVs. The top unit, however, pulled a good bit of power and didn't take its own batteries from what I can tell. This is where the U-shaped clip connectors came into play. These would hook onto the top part of the unit and then feed the connectors into the bay where the batteries are slotted. Then it would use the battery power from the Game Boy itself, which would obviously shorten the battery life of your Game Boy to power the HandyBoy. This last piece, which was optional, hooked over the front of the buttons on the Game Boy. This gave you a pseudo analog stick and raised buttons that supposedly made it easier to play the unit, but all they really did was press the buttons and angle the D-pad just below them, which in my mind likely was no more responsive and in many ways probably less responsive than the original layout, so I would imagine a lot of people just left this off entirely. However, how was this thing received? Well, that's a little harder to speak to. I didn't really find any hard numbers on this device specifically, but I do know as a kid I actually had the Light Boy, just to be able to play my Game Boy at night better, and the screen magnification was a nice addition as well. So I imagine this device was at least reasonably popular. It was notated when I was digging around that the stereo was a bit spotty, oftentimes just magnifying the sound to an obnoxious level and causing issues with the sound of the unit. However, what do you guys think of this one? Did any of you ever have one of these, and how well did it work? Did any of you have any issues using your Game Boy, and what time or scenarios made it the worst? Let me know in the comments. And while you're there, hit that like button. It really does help me out a ton. Also, if you haven't, consider following the channel. That helps me out a ton as well. Till next time though, have a great rest of your day, and until we meet again, happy gaming!